You and I are analog with all this other stuff going around us. We're analog. Our employees are analog. Our customers are analog. And the things that we're going to respond to, things that make human beings want to be around each other, no matter how much digital you have.
Hi, I'm Ed Marsh, host of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. Sometimes on these episodes, I find myself on the opposite side of the microphone from media creators and interviewers who are so experienced that I've got to say it's kind of intimidating. And today is one of those days as I'm joined by the legendary Jim Blasingame. It would take me too long to go through Jim's whole bio, so let me just read quickly some of his credentials to give you a sense of his background. First, don't be misled by his small business title. He's a strategist and a futurist who's consulted to multiple multinationals and Main Street businesses, names that you'll certainly recognize, including IBM and Microsoft, FedEx, the U.S. government, Bloomberg, Aflac, American Express, Office Depot, Western Union, and Insperity. He's delivered keynotes around the world. He sold 300,000 copies of 4 books, which have won 7 international awards, conducted more than 1,000 live interviews during his daily syndicated talk show that ran from 1997 to 2021, produced a digital catalog of 60,000 podcasts. You know, they say that only something like 5% make it past 10. Well, I don't know what percent makes it to 60,000, but it's got to be minuscule. That's 2,600 a year. I mean, he was podcasting before it had a name. His weekly syndicated column ran for almost 25 years in Forbes.com, BusinessJournals.com, Entrepreneur.com, Open, NASDAQ, as well as a number of newspapers and magazines in the U.S. and Canada. He's a former paratrooper and military leader and a huge advocate for veterans, a licensed pilot with multi-engine ratings. And between doing all of that, and I guess sleeping a couple hours per day along the way, a longtime husband and dad, he's a guitar player, an art collector, a wine enthusiast, and more. So settle in for some wisdom, settle in for some sharp ideas. Jim delivers his wisdom in kind of a folksy, enchanting, southern, gentle way, but there's some real cutting and sharp insights and a lot of entertainment. So please like and share this episode. Jim's amazing. I know everyone will learn from it. Everyone deserves to have a chance to learn from him. So welcome, Jim. Thank you very much for joining me.
Hey, Ed, thank you very much for that. I appreciate all those kind words. I'm looking forward to our visit.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled. So let me just say up front, I alluded to it in the introduction, but thank you for your patience with me as essentially a broadcasting rookie. I was on your show a couple times. You always made me feel so comfortable. And I think of you often when I'm interviewing others, and I hope you do. I hope I do you credit as a role model.
I'm sure you do. It's just about talking to people and finding out what's in their head.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got a lot in yours, and we'll see how much of it I'm able to extract from you today. I know you as incredibly hardworking and incredibly generous in giving, but also, I would say, unapologetically capitalist. And it seems today that that combination of character and philosophy are kind of rare, increasingly rare. Why do you think that is?
Well, capitalism is ugly and complicated and unfair and brutal. It can be lots of things that are lots of adjectives that you can apply to it that are not so sweet.
Right.
But it's still the only one that works.
Right.
It's the only one that continues to give time after time after time. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and I just think about all the other isms that are out there that just have not worked, and they've not worked for everybody. They haven't solved everybody's problems. Capitalism hasn't solved all problems, but the thing about capitalism as compared to the other isms, it never meets itself coming back. Uh, let me rephrase it. It's not a bankrupt ideology. All the others are bankrupt because they can only go so far under their own system till they start depleting whoever it is and whatever it is that they're that they're supporting. Right. They deplete those resources. They can't replenish it. Capitalism replenishes itself. It's basically, in my opinion, the best way to describe capitalism is abundance. You can't say abundance about socialism, about communism, about Marxism. You can't think of abundance in those terms with those isms.
Yeah, abundance is
but
a great word.
capitalism is not like that.
I think to your library of podcasts and your brain trust, as you called them over the years, and those conversations that you had, and they were all characterized by optimism and excitement. And I think abundance is probably a great word that ubiquitously applies to all of them. Yeah, it takes hard work. Yes, it takes creativity. Yes, it takes determination and grit to make it through the crappy days, and there's lots of those and everything else. But if you do, you've got the opportunity to tap into that abundance.
And sometimes you get the red licked off your candy, and you just have to get up and go again.
Right. All right.
I mean, I've had my. There is one other quick thing I'd like to
Please.
say. I do think back to your question. I do think it's important, and this is one of the birds under my blanket, is the difference between what you and I practice out here on Main Street, traditional true capitalism, and what's practiced increasingly on Wall Street, and that's monetary capitalism, not product service capitalism. Capitalism is making something of value and finding people who will take it and give you money for it. It's that simple. When you've got like Wall Street, corporate America, God bless them everyone, but they increasingly practice something that I think is what gives capitalism a bad name, because their product so oftentimes is not something you can use. In fact, they even call them synthetics. So that's the only thing I'll say about that.
So value creation. I think what I'm hearing you say, value creation is generally virtuous. Rent seeking, maybe not so much.
That's a really good term to use. That's exactly right. Rent seeking. That's absolutely.
Okay, so we've heard the highlights, but I always like to understand the context of somebody's career, because the way they got to where they are, the lessons they learned along the way, the bumps and bruises and scars, help explain the context of the advice that they give currently. So let's run through your career. I know you started selling on commission at Sears and Roebuck. There's a blast from the past that will echo for some people. It may not even be recognizable for others. Airborne Army officer. You had a stop at Xerox back when Xerox and IBM and Hewlett Packard were really emphasizing sales training, refined it, perfected it, emphasized it, and put people through rigorous training. I'm guessing that was an important stop, but take us quickly through your career to give us the context for the rest of the conversation.
Well, I started shining shoes in the 4th grade.
Wow.
I actually sold on commission before Sears. I delivered furniture for a local furniture company during the day in college, and sold on commission at night after the other delivery guys went home. I stayed and worked for 3 hours at night selling on commission.
Wow.
2%, by the way. And then I went to work for Sears and worked my way through college there. And then, as you say, all the other stops. But all the way, for some reason, I was always attracted to the marketplace. I mean, like I said, I went home one day in the 4th grade and built myself a shoe shine box. went and bought all the stuff you needed, put it in the box. Went down to the local barbershop and said, "Hey, I want to shine shoes, 25 cents."
What?
And they said, "Okay."
Were mom or dad an entrepreneur? Did you get the idea from somewhere, or was it just innate in you?
Not my parents so much, but my grandmother, my mother's mother was, and her father was. And so I guess it came from that. I'm a lot like my mother. I'm not afraid of anything, and she was like that. But no, it's just always been. I mean, the idea. I used to. I would go door to door to sell vegetables in a wheelbarrow when I was in elementary school.
Wow.
I like the idea of the marketplace. The marketplace. We talk about capitalism. Sometimes that throws people off because then you get into politics. Right. The marketplace to me, if you want to get down to the bedrock beauty of what keeps us all fed and prosperous and gives us the opportunity to do whatever we want to do in life, go to the marketplace.
So did you take that shoe shine box with you to Fort Benning for jump school, or did you sign up for boot black?
No, I took a burr head and had to shave my mustache off. And
um, let's talk about your books. I know along the way you've had some notable book publishing successes. I think the one that I believe is the most important is your 2014 book. Here's my copy that is, I'll show you, cherished with a signed by you, Jim. That's the book, The Age of the Customer. And I think this codifies two of your really profound concepts. First, how digital changes everything. Yeah, at the time, you're kind of, it was the avant-garde of it. You recognized it coming, and of course, it continues. And that means that relevance is now your most important business asset. And then the second point, I think it really just makes consistently throughout, is that customer access to information has put them in charge of our interactions with them. It's no longer the salesperson controlling the information. The customer has access to it. And so the role of sales and marketing is completely different than it used to be. Tell us about the book and your thinking, and then maybe pick a couple of the most important, what you would say the most important of the 25 Blasingame laws that you have in there.
Well, I'm a product of the 20th century. I grew up where your competitive advantage was what you were looking for. You were trying to be competitive, competitive. We got the biggest warehouse. We've been in business the longest. We got the lowest prices, blah blah blah, and that worked. And you had to do that. I mean, that wasn't just lip service. You had to do that. And then as we emerged into the to 20th century, 21st century, I should say, uh, then we and the digital world came along. I was in the middle of all that, and having come from that background, and now I see digital transformation before my very eyes, and I'm seeing customers having that leverage. I call it
Right,
leverage that they have. See, when you talked about me working for Xerox. When I was with Xerox, I was my customer's internet
right.
for my whole career, wherever I was my customers and my prospects.
So you can make a
That's
cold
how you
call.
got in the door in sales. As you know, you if you were if all they needed to know was that you were paying attention to what was going on, and they would let you in just to 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 get whatever was in your head, even if they weren't going to buy from
Right.
you, because you were their internet. You brought things from the industry, from across the marketplace. They didn't have that, so you were relevant to
Mm-hmm.
them, even if you weren't competitive. Well, when we get to the digital age, um, all bets are off because now, there's a pie chart in the book there that shows how we went from having like 75% control of the buying decision, sellers, in the age of the seller.
Right.
I call that the age of the seller, to only about a third of the control in the age of the customer because the customers leverage their control. And so now, and this has been this way now for over 20 years. Now, whatever a customer wants to know, they can find out without you even know they
Right.
exist. And so online presence isn't if your online presence isn't relevant to them, long before they find out if you're competitive, they will rule you in or out. And that's the tricky part about digital transformation. And I'll just say one last thing to kind of explain why this has been so hard for folks, especially people of my generation, the baby boomers, is because we humans went for 10,000 years from mammoth to mainframe in the analog world. We've gone from mainframe to mobile in a lifetime. And human beings have had a hard time transitioning, not just in the marketplace, but in almost everything. This digital transformation has really been uh, an abrupt and brutal kind of transformation that we have to make it.
And it's created these generational conflicts or disconnects. I mean, your book is, on the one hand, only 10 years old. On the other hand, it's already 10 years old. And so you've got a generation of middle managers in business that never knew the age of the seller. They've only known the age of the
That's exactly
customer.
right.
And they view
Well, and
relevance
that's
very, very differently than some of us that used to drive around to the back loading dock gate and make physical cold calls that way.
no, that's exactly right. And what we saw, how we saw that happening, was the older generations being brought into the new generation, the new digital transformation, and the younger generations being too impatient. And now we come to where maybe this is a good place to bring up something that I call the schools. Old school, new school. Old school is what you and I grew up learning about in the age of the seller. New school is all this new stuff. Well, I created another school. I've come up with another school. I call it the school.
Right.
And the school are all the things that you cannot throw away from old school. The things in new school that we're going to keep, because some of it we're not going to keep. For example, cash flow, treating customers right, being accountable, doing what you say you'll do, um, things that are immutable.
Right.
That's the school. And the only time I see it, when I see challenges sometimes, are the younger generation. I'd like to encourage them not to be so quick to throw away what they think of as old school. Like, and especially, I mean, cash flow will bite them. Cash flow will, it takes care of itself. But things like loving up your
Right.
customers.
Yeah, I think
Your great grandchildren are going to be analog. They're always going to want to be loved up.
that's a great example. I've had some interesting conversations with people who say our generation, for instance, is really good at building relationships, but we're having a hard time today making the initial connections to create the connection to start to build the relationship on. Whereas a lot of the younger generation can make those connections with a great deal of facility, but they are having a hard time building the relationships. And so the school, I guess, pulls together a lot of the technique to connect with people these days, but the fundamental importance of relationships that we've known about for so long.
Well, and the two words I'll use to help if they'd like to, if anyone would like to know, okay, where do I
Right.
start? I would say, okay, transaction, relationship. It's a transaction that needs to be on the foundation of a relationship, not transaction for its own
Right.
sake. And the more transactional you are, which is absolutely um, the nature of digital, right?
Yeah.
But bada bing,
E-commerce.
bada bam, yeah. And but we gotta find a way. If, in my opinion, the people who will win big in the digital age are the ones that'll find a way to deliver the goods in a digital way, but also support it with relationships that because and this is if you take nothing else away from what we say today or from that book, and that is that we're always going to be analog. And I'm going to go back to John Nesbitt in his book Megatrends, 1981-82 book Megatrends, a landmark book. He said this, which most people know: the more high tech we have, the more high touch we will
Right.
want. He was talking about analog humans making the digital transformation.
And touch has to be more than just likes on a post.
Exactly right. Yeah, yeah. Go by to see people. Go. Take people to lunch. You know, it's taking the time. It's and nothing is more relevant. Once you break through and they see that you've got a mobile, they see that you've got a mobile site, and they can go on your site and they can do what they want to do. Once they see that your values are good, they like your values. Then you still need to go further than that.
Taking people to lunch reminds me, I've been speaking with a number of people lately who talk about community and talk about events. And yes, events are back after COVID, but the events that seem to be really working effectively are a very different kind of event, bringing 10 peers together for dinner, for instance, and really having an in-depth exchange, building relationships, building connections, not just walking through a trade some sort of a trade event and seeing a lot of people and maybe exchanging a lot of business cards, but deep, meaningful, mutually beneficial connections.
Yeah, and I saw that over the last 20 years, going to a lot of conferences and everything. I saw a lot of the young people pushing back when those things were being planned and saying, these things aren't as relevant to
Right.
us. I can see that happening, and it'll all work out. I'll, people my age will shuffle off to the background, and the younger people will take over, and it'll be their marketplace, and that's fine. I don't care how they get together. But I will never turn loose of the immutable fact that as human beings, we're always going to be analog. That means we're always going to need high
Right.
touch. And even if I don't demand high touch from you, I want it from you. And if you give it to me, you will have an advantage.
So was the idea of the customer first book, was that something that coalesced over a long time out of the ether into a concept for the book? Or did you just realize one day, did it hit you that you had to write this and here was the message?
Um, a buddy of mine and I were talking on the show one time, and he used the term the post post advertising. He used that term post advertising, and that I couldn't get that out of my head. And what he was talking about was the fact that advertising was that's a 20th century thing that we still do, but it's not, just telling people what your inventory is and what your price is not relevance. That's competitive.
Right.
And you just have to repeat this. This is so important. In the 21st century, in the digital age, long before people know if you're competitive or not, you will have to be relevant first. And so when he said that, that was one of the things that set my mind. And of course, I was already ready to think about it because I was helping small businesses with the digital transformation every
Mm-hmm.
day. That was one of the main things I did in my show for 23 and a half years was help them make the digital transformation. But when he said that word, um, it just that term, I never heard anybody say that before, and it made a lot of sense. And I started coalescing my thinking about competitive, relevant, and then relevance. That's a word I'm not going to say I used it first, but after my book, a lot of people started focusing on relevance, and it's still valid right now today.
So of the 25 laws, can you pick one or two that you just really hang your hat on?
Well, two or three main ones are a small business is not a little big business. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand. Big companies have a hard time with that. And that was one of the ways I made a living supporting big companies for a long time was helping them understand that your small business customers, your small business contractors they're not little big businesses. And I don't know what are some of the others. I don't have them right in front of me, but the um, cash. You know, if you can't if you can't project cash 12 months out, you're probably not going to make it.
Right.
Cash is king. Cash is not king. Cash is the emperor. And uh, that's
Got
all.
it. In the forward to the book, Steve Forbes said that folks will either see you as a prophet or a heretic. I would say 10 years later, it's clear that you were the former. You were absolutely a prophet. What's interesting, though, is that for the bulk of the audience for this podcast, who are middle market industrial manufacturers, I think a lot of this may still feel heretical. They haven't quite transitioned. In fact, I often hear executives and owners of these companies saying, well, our buyers don't use the web, even though, in their company, they use it routinely. It's part of the fabric of how we all live and do business. But there's this disconnect in how they think about their buyers. Do you have any idea why some industries may be so much slower to embrace the changes that you saw quite a while ago?
Well, those are the sounds of a Tyrannosaurus Rex waiting to become extinct. And and you're hearing that from from an old school guy. But the heretic, you know what a heretic is? A heretic is a true believer who doesn't like the status quo. And so I'm a heretic. There's no question about that. I've been sticking my finger in the eye of a status quo all my life,
Right.
really. I mean, I got sent to the this is talk about an old school term. I got sent to the boiler room by the principal many times in school because I stuck my finger in the eye of too many teachers or whoever. I was a little smart aleck kid, but so I've been a heretic all my life, but you know a a prophet is nothing more than somebody who I think I do think of myself as a futurist because I'm curious and I am a heretic, and so when I see something, I try to imagine what are the implications for that on the other side of that.
Well, and you
And
walk
I
the
think
talk.
I
I mean,
think
you registered your domains back before there were really many websites, if I understand correctly.
oh yeah, no, I did, and uh a lot of that because I was, as I said, I saw this coming, but the thing is make is if you have to realize that the digital age is not something that's going to change. And what I'm more worried about is that we're up to our ears in the digital age, and we still have a lot of people who are having difficulty with it. And we're there's something going on right now that's going to connect us AI to the quantum
Right.
age. And what I hope I live long enough to see, it's going to be scary, is what all that's going to look like, because if you can't get your head around the digital age, how are you going to handle what's coming
Sure.
next, which is AI and quantum?
One of the essence of your B2B relevance law is to help your customer help their customers. I mean, that's the way you ultimately become relevant to a company. And kind of going back to this dissonance that I see with a lot of industrial manufacturers, I would contrast that approach to what I see many companies do, which is to spend all their energy and marketing dollars and a lot of their sales time just vomiting up technical details about their product and maybe about the company too. A few think about the customer, but it's really a very rare company that thinks about their customers, which is really, I think, how you establish that relevance. Any reflections on that? It kind of relates to the last question,
Yeah.
but I think it's a little bit different in terms of mindset, maybe.
Well, no, there's no question. And I want to repeat that because it's worth repeating. Help your customers. Help if you want to have customers, you can't run off. People who will be loyal to you even when the price that they can get is cheaper somewhere else. Help your customers help their customers. I've actually helped my customer help their customer help their customer. I've gone three deep before, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever done. And but see, this is one thing that's important to realize. This is old school because nothing made me happier 50 years ago, almost 45 years ago, when I was with Xerox. I'd walk into a purchasing agent or account manager's, a plant manager's office, and he'd say, "Hey Jim, come on in," and we'd talk a little while. And there's obviously I'm not going to sell him anything today, and he or she would say, "By the way, I'm having this issue here," or no, here's what I would say: What's going on today? What elephant are you fighting today? What alligator is eating on you today? That'd be the first thing I'd say to them. And they'd say, well, yeah, I got this thing here. And I'd say, well, do you know so and so? They say no. And I say, well, hang on. I'd walk around their desk before cell phones. I'd walk around their desk, pick up the phone, dial the phone, and say, hey, John, I got Bill here. Can you help him? Hang on. I'd hand Bill the
Right.
phone. I'd leave.
Right.
I'd walk out the door. I couldn't run that customer off because I came there to selling something, but it was obvious to me he wasn't going to buy from me even if he needed it because he had a bigger
Right.
alligator. And that's what you're talking about when you can make your customers. I used to have when I had my first consulting company before the media company, I would be driving home or maybe be at home at 7:30 at night. I'd think of something. I'd pick up the phone and call one of my clients, and I'd say, "Hey, have you thought about so?" Because they're like you and me. They would think about their business all the
Right.
time. They're never off, and they like the fact two things that somebody else was thinking about them at night. It wasn't just
Mm-hmm.
them. There was another brain out there thinking about their problems. Number one, and number two, they found out that I did not bill them for that phone call
Right. So
because I didn't.
uh, establishing relevance, creating connection. Another theme that I find consistent across your work is storytelling. I mean, every conversation, people have heard it already in this conversation. Every conversation with you is punctuated by stories. They're relevant to the topic. They kind of illustrate your point. The arc of your radio interviews really is a story over time, individually and in aggregate. Where did this emphasis on stories come from?
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I really do. If you think, and it wasn't anything intentional. I didn't have a plan, but I do think that the origins may be where my understanding of how the marketplace got started. I mean, before there was, what is advertising? What is marketing? What is relationship building? It's
Right.
storytelling. How did languages get started? How did markets how did markets get built and connected through storytelling before there was the written word, before there was currency? Uh, it was all about storytelling. I mean,
Cave
think about
paintings.
everything that we have right now that's been passed down over time through
Mm-hmm.
storytelling. And and one thing that I think I've learned, I don't care what generation you're talking to, people still like stories. Now, the young people act like they don't at first, but they really do. If they'll sit still long enough, they really will. But it is funny. I do have so I have some clients now that the there are a couple of generations in the family, two or three generations in some of the clients, and the kids will say, "Here comes one of Jim's stories," but they don't complain. They just like to tease
Right.
me about it. But I think it's important that we not shy away from telling stories, because for one thing, um, one of the great closes of all time is the similar situation close. I've made more money using the similar situation close to close a customer than any other close, and all that is a
Mm-hmm.
story.
The stories obviously help to shift people's thinking long before it's time to close. For when you get somebody who's preoccupied with the current situation, all their priorities, often a story can put them in a place where they can actually focus their thinking on a topic that's relevant.
It
Right.
transports them. It transports them. So here's how you begin something like that. If you're using the similar situation close, you would say, "Let me tell you a story about a guy that I know who had a similar." You actually say, "Who have a similar situation." I know somebody who had a similar situation, and he told me about it, and this is what we did. That's
Right.
all there is to it. I mean, the story might last 15 seconds, and it puts people at ease. It brings down their anxiety level. and now they feel like you are someone they can it builds trust, it engenders trust, but of course then, as you know, you have to
Sure.
deliver on that.
Now, it's possible to tell a story in writing. Obviously, there's lots of written stories, but telling the story face to face, or somebody hearing your voice and hearing the tonality and all those kinds of things really helps. And so that kind of brings me to radio and interviews and podcasting. You started podcasting before it was a thing. How did that happen?
I was I spent 20, 30 years, really 30 years, one on one. And after a number of years in my consulting company working not one on one, I was just arrogant enough to think I had something to say to more than one person at a time. And I started researching it, and so in '97 I started researching it, and by November of '97 I launched my radio show, the only one I ever had, as a radio show on a network across America. And by one really important thing that happened, though, which connects us to the podcast. First, let me say I didn't have any baggage. I didn't have any radio baggage. A lot of people who became business or that kind of of a
Hmm.
host had some radio baggage. They were in the radio industry. I didn't have any of that. So that happened in November. In January of '98, 2 months later, I had the ability to put my show on a simulcast on real.com, I think was the website. Real.com, I think it was, I'm trying to remember who the founder was, but they would pick up my radio show off the air and simulcast it in real time. And I remember thinking, this is a game
Right.
changer because I didn't have radio baggage. I didn't care how they were listening, and consequently, a lot of people who had radio baggage were years later putting it out on the internet because they had the baggage,
Self-limiting
and the
thoughts,
radio
head
station
trash,
easier.
things that held them back.
Yeah, and the radio stations didn't care for it either because they thought that people still didn't understand the reach, the
Right.
leverage of the internet. And so consequently, as you know, within a few years, radio stations were simulcasting their entire 24-hour
Right.
programming. And uh, so I did that, and that happened in January of '98. And then within a year or two, I was capturing my own interviews and cutting them into segments,
Hmm.
into archives, which 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 is still I could do a radio show, get off the air at 8, and have 10 podcasts up by
Wow.
8:30 because I had somebody build me an
Hmm.
editing platform.
Out of all those interviews, thousands of them over the years, are there a couple that stand out for you for some particular reason?
Besides the one that you and I did, yeah. Um, well, I interviewed. I'll tell you this, and I mean this. I interviewed a lot of really, you would think, of powerful people. I could drop a bunch of names, all the way up to some presidential candidates, and names, big global names. I interviewed them. But there was a lady that I interviewed. Her name was, I'll say her name in a minute. And she was owned a print shop in Kabul, Afghanistan.
Hmm.
And she was over here on an entrepreneurial education program in probably '08 or '09 when we were helping.
Right.
And in those days, the Afghanistan parliament, newly created constitution, required women to be allowed women to be in the parliament when 10 years before they couldn't even go
Right.
outside. And so she was the only woman-owned print shop in all of Kabul, and she was getting a lot of a lot of problems from people who didn't want her to be in business. And she was over here, left her husband and daughter and children to operate. And I interviewed her face to face in Washington, D.C. And at the end of the interview, I said, why, with all the things that you're being put through, you've been burned out, you're getting all kinds of dangerous things that are happening to your family, why are you doing this? Why would you put up with all that? Why would you go to that kind of trouble? And she said, because I have a daughter.
Have you been in touch with her over the last
I
2 years?
I've not been in touch with her, but I have kept up with her through the people I work with. And she doesn't have a print shop anymore, of course. You know what happened to Afghanistan.
Right.
But I mean, any questions?
Right.
Because I have a daughter.
Right.
Any questions? You know, I mean, that said it all to me. Why do we do what we do?
Right.
Because we have children. We want something better for them. And this, the point to that, I think, is what you and I are talking about, the marketplace. That's not an American thing. The marketplace is 10,000 years old before we ever had one over here.
Right.
So it's the ability to have liberty, to pursue your dreams is human. It's not American.
Right. That's quite a story. Speaking of Jim's stories, another story that you told me one time that really made an impression on me was your recollection, and I may get some of the details wrong, but I think walking through a Fortune 500 headquarter building with the CEO who you had done business with, you'd worked on some projects, you were a consultant to him or her. The two of you were discussing their role as a decision maker and how it was decreasing. So an F500 CEO saying, geez, I don't make decisions the same way I used to. And the two of you realized in conversation that in both of your businesses, this switch had happened. You used to be able to meet with a traditional decision maker, get agreement, and move ahead. But now you might get a phone call or a meeting. You might get agreement around the fact there's a problem and some outcomes that they want. But the bureaucracy and committee decision making meant that they were no longer a decision maker. So this F500 CEO was having the same problem when they would reach out to their peers that you were seeing in your business and discussing with them. You had agreement to work on something, but then they had to turn it over to a committee. Am I remembering those details correctly? And
That's a very good recollection.
okay.
To net it out, I was in his headquarters and he was asking me about my business. I was asking him about his business. By the way, this was post 2008.
Okay.
2008 caused a major shift, it was a major disruption.
So the great financial crisis.
On how people did business. People don't realize, especially for Main Street, doing business with corporate America, it was a major disruption, never to be repaired. But what was the context was prior to 2008, I could call on a manager or a VP of any of these corporate America companies, and they had a budget. They could make a decision. I could build a relationship with them, and in many cases, I had an 8-year relationship with IBM. I had a 18-year relationship with Insperity. I had a 5-year relationship with FedEx. I mean, you could have those kinds of relationships, but after 2008, so that person, remember, they could make a decision. They had a budget. After 2008, that person who'd maybe been with the company 20 or 30 years was no longer there. They were replaced by a younger person who was given no budget, no authority. They could meet me, they could receive my proposal, but it had to go up the scale, up the ladder to the CFO's office, basically, who had all the budgets. Now, I'm saying this to this CEO. He says, well, not to top you, but I used to call on the president of that company, the CEO of that company. And I'd go in there and I'd say, hey, George, I got this idea here. And George would say, how much? About $8 million. And George would reach over and push the button and say, send Bill in here or Mary in here. and Mary would come in, a VP, a senior VP, and George would say, "Here, uh, Jim wants to do this. Make it happen." And now, obviously, the guy delivered, or he wouldn't have that credibility.
Right.
This wasn't baloney.
Right.
This is a real deal. But they could make those decisions. He told me that my experience going up the ladder to the CFO, that now when he called on the CEO, he said, "Al, I got to run this through my CEO, my CFO." So we were both meeting in the middle,
Right.
and that changed everything. And he was lamenting that the same way I was lamenting.
So
And that's the
2008,
impact of 2008.
the catalyst for the changes that you're talking about, I assume, was the great financial crisis.
No question.
Okay.
No question about it. It shook everybody to their core, and that was something that I'm still mad about. That was something that was preventable. There was larceny there. This wasn't about subprime mortgages. This was about all this synthetic stuff we talked
Right.
about, and the credit default swaps. This was about leveraging one mortgage, in some cases, leveraging one mortgage 70 times.
Yeah, I think,
And nobody went to jail.
we could talk a long time about that, but that story, the thing that jumps out at that story to me is that overlaid on top of the digital transformation. So we talk about how it's harder to reach buyers, how there's now larger buying teams, and we attribute all those things to this digital transformation. But you make the point that there were two overlapping things. The digital thing was ramping up, but there was also this fundamental wake up call for companies about financial viability and security, and the overreaction was to clamp down on everything. And now I think there's another overreaction, which is to try to include everyone in the decision so that nobody can say they weren't consulted, nobody can passively aggressively resist it. And so now we've got these committees of 15 people, and what does it take to get 15 people aligned with different personalities, different preferences, different departmental silos and budgets and priorities? How do we get 15 people to agree on doing anything? And so the default now is doing nothing in many cases.
I'm afraid you may be right. You know what the camel is? A camel is a horse made by committee. And so that's what you run into. But some of that stuff was happening a long time ago. Corporate America has always had a challenge getting out of its own way sometimes.
Sure.
But they'd have so many things going. Some of it would work. But and then of course then we rolled out of that into the pandemic.
Right.
And that was another major disruption that reset society, not just the marketplace, but society. And on top of all that, we're still digitally transforming.
Right.
And so this is why. Let me make one really important point here. There's a lot of anxiety because of all that. I still can go back and I could, I could. We could write a bunch of books about what 2008 did. Books are being written about what the pandemic did. I actually wrote a book about it while it was going on, and how it affected small businesses. But the main thing to remember is that we all have to. We're not going to get out of this alive. We've got to stay with it, and it's just one of those things that we have to deal with, and lamenting it. We just got to move on.
On the other hand, recognizing it may give us some clarity in how to try to address it.
Well, that's right. That's right. No, if you're not aware of it, the thing that helped me survive 2008 was realizing where the problem
Right.
was, and not going there, going somewhere else. Uh, COVID was something very similar, and if you're not capable of seeing what the problem is and identifying where people get stuck, you're not going to be able to be relevant to them, because remember, your customers are just as stuck as you
Right.
are. They're looking for people to lead them out, and that's what I always try to do, is lead them out, and to be relevant to them as much as I could.
So you brought the strategy perspective, you also had a great deal of tactical acumen and a number of guests that would complement both of those. One of the things that I think characterizes your body of work and expertise is the breadth of it. I mean, you talk finance down to cash flow and very specific details about finance, but also you talk about M&A with companies. You talk marketing and sales, cybersecurity. You talked about for a long time before other people were global expansion, legal, HR, and many more topics. And that's a big part of the value that that your show and your body of work brought, because there's important insights in each of those, but the business acumen to understand how they all fit together is critical, and that's part of the value proposition of your show, I think. And that seems rare these days, where people dive into one silo and they look at the entire world through the lens of that silo.
Well, that's a really insightful point to make about the silos. A lot of people who did what I did on the radio or on the internet back before, when not there were not that many outlets out
Right.
there, uh, they were vertical. They focused on growth. They focused on M&A. They focused on HR. They focused on cyber. They were
Mm-hmm.
vertical, and my career made me more of a generalist, and I was more interested in all those
Right.
things. And I knew that small business owners needed to know all of those
Right.
areas, because even though we might not be involved in M&A, our customers, our corporate customers were.
Right.
We'd have contracts. If you have a contract with an enterprise company and you're not aware that before that contract is up, you could be dealing with somebody else, you don't know how to write
Right.
that contract. And so that was what I tried to do. I tried to make sure that if I had 4 interviews a day, producing 6 segments. Each segment was a little bit different than the other. I tried to make sure that we talked about 4 completely different things in a day, and that we did the best we could to do that, and we pretty much did that.
Let's talk about veterans of business, because that was an aspect that was, I think, a thread through a lot of your interviews and a lot of your content. First, thank you for your service, and second, I guess, as we'd say in the airborne community,
And
all the
you?
way. But talk about your service and how it impacted your career and your perspective, and your sense of what companies may misunderstand about the value that veterans bring to their businesses.
Well, like you, I've been around military people all my life, and my dad helped save the world with General Patton, World War II. His name was James. And I wore the uniform for 15 years, active in the reserves. And I was a commander for 3.5 years, which I wouldn't take anything for that experience. And, and I saw the kind of people that veterans are, the kind of people that you could take someone who never rose above an E2 after 4 years, still understood organization and discipline, and showing
Right.
up, and the consequences of not doing a good job, and teamwork, and chain of command, rules, regulations, SOPs, uh, way we operate. You take a kid who joins the military at 18 and comes out at 20 or 22. They've got all that, and their peers who stayed home may have one or
Right.
two of those. And so one of the things I was able to do was leverage my support of veterans through the SBA. The SBA has a great, at least they did have a great, uh, part of their organization was the veterans organization, plus all of the other different veterans organizations. I worked with the UA, with uh, uh, the VFW and the American Legion. I did many interviews a year with them, especially on the holidays, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, 4th of July, things like that, and did a lot of interviews with them to find out what they were doing for veterans. But I would just tell people, if you want to find somebody who's ready to roll, who's ready to load up and move forward, and when you talk to them about things that sound like organization, discipline, etc., these people know what that is. Hire a veteran. At least what I would say is, I'm not going to tell you to hire them. I'm going to tell you that if you have a chance,
Our
interview them.
mutual friend John Panaccione, who you interviewed at least once, maybe more than once, for your show,
More
he
than
was part
once.
of your you called it, what is it, the Brain Trust, right?
The brain trust,
So
yeah.
John makes the point. He's been a tremendous supporter. He's a veteran himself. He was also in the airborne community. He makes a point about the a lot of companies misunderstand the fact that veterans come with a very refined decision making algorithms that they've been taught. And so not only do they have the grit and the discipline and the um, persistence and all those other kinds of attributes that people often think about, but they have been trained in how to make decisions. And often we just talked about how companies often struggle to make decisions. And so that could be a really valuable contribution as well.
There's no question about it because, as you know, especially if they're enlisted, I mean, any officer worth his or her salt knows that the United States military is run by NCOs. Officers are on, they make the big decisions maybe or whatever, but the machine of the military is run by the NCOs, and so you have a kid coming out of the military who was an E3 or an E4 or an E5 sergeant or whatever after 2 or 3 years, that person is ready
Right.
to go, and if you just what I worry about is there are some there's some people out there that have this idea about veterans. They're I don't know, they're just different people who maybe they're not familiar with the military, and so they might have a negative connotation to it. That's a
Right.
mistake. That's a big mistake. Again, I'm not telling you to hire them. I don't know who they are, but if you don't interview them, you're going to miss an opportunity probably. And uh, and I've just seen veterans come back and become so key to so many
Sure. Yeah.
organizations
They
out there,
understand management.
and they're
They understand
looking
leadership. They understand the difference between them. I think trust is another piece. I don't think you mentioned, but was inherent in the company that you led. I mean, a rigging company, rigging parachutes for other people to jump with. I mean, what a manifestation of trust that we have standards, we have
That's right.
double checks, we have leadership, we have management, and I'm willing to put on a
Yep.
parachute to somebody I've never heard of that comes from a completely different background than me in a different part of the country and raised with different values. But I'm comfortable when I put my knees in the breeze that they have packed that correctly because of the structure and the
Yep.
decisions and the management and the leadership that framework that we all work under.
Well, and pride of
Yep.
ownership. See, that's another word that I'd like to encourage business owners to claim and to leverage with their people is ownership. When we pack that parachute, there's a logbook in that parachute stuck in
Right.
the riser. It's a little bitty multi-page book, and we would write the date, serial number of the parachute, and sign our name. If that parachute didn't open and that book survived, it came back
Right.
on us. And so that's accountability, but it's also
Right.
ownership. And I'd like to encourage people as you especially with the younger generations. I think that's a word that transcends generations, because just because you're 20 doesn't mean you're not capable of
Sure.
having pride. You might not be a great. You might rather be on your phone than look at somebody face to face, but you still
Right.
have pride. And I think ownership is a big deal. That's I worked a lot. I employed a lot of millennials, and one of the ways we did that and successfully is when we gave them a job. I would say to them, "You own that job. This is my company, but that job
Hmm.
belongs to you." And they would, they got it.
Right.
They like that. So and when you tell a veteran that, you don't have to talk
Right.
very long about that.
Let's talk about community. There's obviously the military, the veteran community, and we've touched on it, but the need to bring people together for trust and relevance. And this brings me to your law of business social media. I think you anticipated this more than a decade ago. You talk about going online to build customer communities, that you need to contribute first and contact second, and maybe extract value third, if at all. That customers will increasingly come from community building activity and less from traditional marketing and business development. That those outbound approaches that characterize the age of the seller. Again, I got to keep asking you, how did you see this happening? Because everyone's talking about it now, but you wrote about it 10 years ago.
This is all part of relevance. Relevance is a multifaceted concept, right? Trust is relevance. Do you have a mobile site to your regular site? That's relevance. But also all the things you were just talking about, those are all relevant things that are part of the digital age that you have to be able to deliver on, and it's to me it was just an extension of relevance. And again, just to dwell on any one particular, it's anything that you can do to get someone to be attracted to you as early
Right.
as possible, but not to your price. And this is where things have changed. So 40 years ago, if you bragged, so to speak, if you talked about what you did in the marketplace, in the community, some people would think you were bragging, and it wasn't really allowed that much. Today, that's not called bragging; that's called
Right.
demonstrating your values. And the younger generation of customers, meaning anybody under 50 now, they're attracted to that. But on your homepage, they don't just want to see your product; they want to see that you've got employees who
Right.
give back. They want to see things like that. It's powerful, and that is relevance that will make people say, like as I've said many times before, if you're looking for a product online, you're going to get 150 options in the shopping button, and they're all within a nickel of each other. How do I find one that I want to do business with? I'm going to click through two or three, and the first one that looks like me, the things that I care about, I, I know I can get the product. I know I can get it for $3 and delivered, but do I want to
Right.
do business with you? The relevance is in what you said, the social part,
Com-
the
right.
community part. Don't be afraid to put your foot forward, and that comes first. It's part of the initial relevance.
Many companies in the middle market industrial manufacturing space are family owned. Sometimes G1, often G3 or G4, and ownership transitions are a consistent topic. But leadership transition is often more important, and leadership may transition more often than ownership. You've argued that a CEO's ability to promote or fire themselves is critical. Talk about that in the context of middle market, privately held industrial manufacturing companies going through a leadership transition. How does the CEO know when it's time to fire themselves?
Well, the way I think of that is that applies two ways. One is from a delegation standpoint. You cannot grow your organization as the leader, founder, whatever. You cannot grow if you can't delegate. Of course, you have to hire people who you can delegate to. Everyone is not like that. Back to our
Right.
veterans idea. But you have to be able to delegate. And so what I say is, if you want, I was a horrible delegator. But then I figured out that I needed to fire myself from jobs that I no longer needed to do, and promote myself to jobs because my frustration was that I wasn't getting things done that I wanted to get
Mm-hmm.
done. But it was because I was still doing stuff I didn't need to
Right.
do. So I fired myself from those jobs, gave that ownership to someone else, promoted myself to the new job to get the stuff done. Now I can grow my business because I got out of my own
Right.
way. Now, a lot of people might be thinking, well, I'm not good enough to do this job. It might be that you're not managing your time well. You're not managing your energy well. You're not delegating properly. If you could delegate, and see, here's the other thing. It's unlikely that you're the CEO or the founder, especially if you're a founder, that you're good at
Sure.
everything: accounting, finance, vision, marketing, product. You're going to be good at two or three of those, but not some others. Get those off your
Hmm.
plate. Now you can focus on what you're really, really good at. You might be able to be the leader of the company forever. I've actually known founders of companies to demote themselves to executive vice president, hire a CEO to run the company. Now they still owned it, but they hired someone because they weren't the best person
Sure.
for the job. But that's a different topic now from the generational thing, from the G1,
Right.
G2 thing. But that's one of the things I'm doing with my clients right now is trying to help them understand this hiring and firing yourself, getting out of your own way. Over the last 40 years, as I've walked into companies, there's only been one thing that I saw every single time without exception. They couldn't get
Right.
out of their own way. And that's what I would help them do.
You talked about managing energy and managing time. You've worked a brutal schedule for many years. What time did the show go live in the morning? 6, 5:30?
6 o'clock
Yeah.
Central Time. My alarm went off at 4:20 for 23 and
Wow.
a half years,
So
5 days
the
a week.
radio show ended in '01. I think your weekly blog and email only ended maybe 6 or 12 months ago. So
Yeah, last
so
November.
suddenly you've got all this extra time. How are you occupying
I have four grandsons: hurricane, tornado, crash, and train wreck.
it?
And so right now I've got three legacies that I'm working on. One is my professional legacy, which is helping small businesses, entrepreneur-sized companies, giving them a whole lot more for their money than they could ever get if they want me to help them. Uh, and sometimes I do a lot of it for nothing. That's one. The other is I'm in the process of conveying my digital catalog to my alma mater, my university alma mater. So that's one of my other legacies. So that our interviews will live on after we're gone. And the third one is my grandsons. That's my third legacy. I just turned 75 last month, and I'm working on that right now. But I'm not retired because retirement is waiting to die, and so I'm semi-retired.
But along the way, you've also had some other hobbies. So, there's some story about a backhoe. Give us a short version of that.
Well, I bought a lake house, a lake lot, and I knew I was going to be tearing that old house down and building a house back, which we did. Um, and so I grew up on a farm. I know how to operate equipment, tractors, and backhoes, and excavators. So I knew I was renting equipment to deal with my construction. And I said, heck, I can buy a backhoe, a used backhoe. So I bought a '79 backhoe, old school backhoe with all the dials. It's a grown man's backhoe. I bought a '79 backhoe. There was a one owner, and I paid for it, and then sold it for what I paid for it. But I paid for it by having not having to rent equipment, and I enjoyed it. It brought me back to my roots.
And in your art collection, what kind of art do you look for?
Well, I've been collecting art for long time, 60, 50 something years. I started out with you can see the one behind me there. That's a Charles Kroom uh, uh, a lithograph, and quite a few lithographs. Ray Harm, uh, Froger, and a lot of a lot of the different artists. But then over the years, about 30, 40 years ago, I started collecting original art. And so wherever I would go, I would pick up a piece of art. And so now my art collection is the story of my
Interesting.
travels. And my wife Devana, who's my partner in business and life, and she's my I'm the reason we get invited to go places. She's the reason we get invited to go back.
So, do you guys have the same taste in art, or is there a competition to try to
Oh,
find interesting things for each of you?
it's a little scary how matched up we are on so many things. but we still manage to get on each other's
There you
nerves
go.
quite often.
Well, you need to get out and spend more time. Either get a new backhoe or spend more time with the grandsons. Give her some space, I guess. Um, what's something you're a very accomplished guy, but we all have things that we put a lot of effort into and we may enjoy, but we've never really gained the proficiency that we do in other areas of our life. What's your thing that you've worked really hard to get better at, but you don't achieve at the same level you do in other areas?
The guitar.
Okay.
I started playing the guitar at 15, and I'm a reasonable technician, but I was never talented at it, and I wish I was more talented playing the guitar. Uh, I didn't get very far down the road on this, but I wish I had learned more
Hmm.
languages, or a language. I wish I'd done that. I encourage my children to do that. And I wish I had uh, wish I'd learned to play the piano. I took lessons and then decided I'd rather play basketball. And at 5'9", you can imagine what kind of a great basketball player I
I guess you're
became
saying you
with a
would have been better off
a
sticking with
vertical leap of
piano.
an inch and a half. Yeah, right.
Um,
But
Shifting back to business, there's this huge trend. Some people call it silver tsunami. All of the boomers that own businesses that may have thought they wanted to die at their desk, who now say, "Well, geez, maybe I want a little bit of time to do what I'd rather do," or maybe they've just been head down working, and suddenly it strikes them that, well, they need to come up with a plan from the owner's perspective in terms of preparation, as well as from the company's perspective. If you're a middle market company, you ought to be thinking about ways to grow through inorganic growth as these companies come on the market. Do you have any advice to either side of that transaction?
well, I actually, if you go back and read my, I think it was April 26, 2000 article, somewhere in there in the end of April, 1st of May, I've forgotten the exact date. I wrote an article. It was one of the chapters of my ebook on the pandemic, small business in the pandemic. I called it the new regular because everybody kept calling it the new normal, and I said there's nothing normal
Right.
about this. So I titled it the new regular. But I warned people. See, I was hearing people uh, after the lost decade from 2008 to 2016, basically, kind of a lost decade there for a number of reasons. Small business owners, it was a Main Street lost decade. From 2016 to 2020, things were great. I was talking to small business owners who were saying, "Man, I was thinking about retiring, but I'm gonna keep doing this. This is fun." And then the pandemic happened, and so in 2000, in that article, I told people, young people, start looking for small businesses that would not have been available to you to start becoming available, because they're going to say these people who were then in their say 65 to 75, they're starting to say, you know what? This is a marketplace I don't recognize. This is a world I don't recognize. This is too much trouble, too much work. I don't need this. I'm going to exit. And so I really believe that that's happened significantly more because of the pandemic than it would have been. And so I just think that there's a lot of opportunity out there. And now one thing that's happened that's happened since then, actually, is interest rates have gone
Hmm.
up. See, so a lot of businesses that might have been sold to M&As, to private equity or whatever, those multiples came down because of interest going up. So what they might have thought they were going to get 12 or 14 multiple, they might be offered 5 or 6 now. Well, you might have a chance to go in there and be creative in the transaction and acquire
Right.
that company. And there's a lot of ways to do that. There's a gazillion ways to slice that, and put you on a way of meeting everybody's
Hmm.
expectations, and that's helping you exit and helping you find an opportunity. I think there's opportunity out there right now. If you want to deal with what's going on right now, you see the future. I mean, you know, you're going to have to feed your family for the next 10 or 20 years, whereas your seller
Right.
is ready to go.
Yeah, I think companies overlook inorganic growth. Middle market companies assume they're not big enough. They're not, a multinational to do M&A. They don't have a corporate development department. All those kinds of excuses or rationale. But if you're a 30 or 50 or $100 million company, there's no reason that you can't buy a $5 million company that takes you into a new market or get you IP or get you particular talent or whatever the case may be.
I know one family that's been doing that for the
Hmm.
last 30 years, and they've just it's just they've given a clinic on what you just said. And when I started working with them in 35 years ago, they were at
Wow.
5 million. I don't know what their number is now, but it's doing exactly what you said.
A neat story about the marketplace working.
The
Over
marketplace.
years, a lot of people have turned to you for your business advice and wisdom. But where do you go, or where have you gone recently? What podcasts or YouTube channels, blogs, books? Where do you continue to learn and exercise and create new ideas?
Well, I had a unique advantage for 23 and a half years. I got, excuse me, I got four really smart people in my ear for
Right.
2 hours, 5 days a week. I got so much stuff then that it was very valuable for me. But I don't, I don't follow too many specific people. It's more subject matter. Uh, I'll try to find different things, articles. I read the Wall Street Journal every day, and I read a lot of articles, and I do listen to some podcasts, but it's more transactional. Whatever I'm
Hmm.
focused on, but I still call. Well, you and I still
Right.
talk. Off the air. I still connect with a lot of my Brain Trust members because they're the font of so much good information that if you want to find uh, a source of experts, go to my website. Go to smallbusinessadvocate.com and don't do anything else but go to the guests, and they're in there by category, like Ed is, and find the category you got on your mind, and there's a link somewhere in there to their website, and follow those people because they're worthy. We didn't let anybody on the show. You had to
Right.
measure up. We had the best, only the best on our show.
And all those shows and all those articles every week for so long, you created a massive body of content. Yet many people and many companies struggle to just create one video or one blog per week. What's the difference? Why were you able to do that and others struggle? Is it some magical God given talent, or is it mindset? Is it work ethic? What is it?
Well, if you're only going to do one or two, you're going to fuss over it, right? Your first child, you kept them in a bubble.
Right.
Your third child, get out, go play in the dirt. And so when you're doing as many as I did, you didn't cluck over, you didn't worry about it. You just did the best you could. But here's another thing and I saw this happening back when back 15 years ago, when Twitter first came out. Um, it would take corporate America 6 weeks for the attorneys to approve
Right.
one tweet. And so you got to get the lawyers out of it. That's for sure. You just got to get the lawyers out of it. They'll hold everything up. But I would just say, and I used to do that for companies. They would use my show as their outlet, and I would let them talk about their offering because that's the quid pro quo. But when they'd come on, they would have to bring
Hmm.
content. 90% of what we talked about was what they knew that they
Right.
could teach, and 10% was we talk about their product. That's quid pro quo, right? That's just like any other kind of medium.
But the bottom line is, don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough.
That's exactly right, and that's something that if I could tell people, and probably one of my laws. I haven't looked at them lately, but seek excellence, not
Right.
perfection. Ed, when you and I do things, it's perfect, and I'm not making a joke. when we do it, it's perfect because it's exactly how we wanted it to be. But when we delegate, you do not expect perfection out of them. Expect excellence and make them give you excellence. That ownership should give you excellence. But that's a different variation on what you would do. But you have to remember, if it has to be perfect, you'll wind up being a sole proprietor of one and you'll
Right.
never grow.
You mentioned people can go to the website, to the archives, and find information. For people that want to access all those years of business insights, maybe even connect with you, give us that URL again, as well as a recommendation of how people would connect with you.
Well, I'm smallbusinessadvocate.com. It's a 27-year-old
Wow.
website, and it's very easy to use, and it's free. It's all free. And I'm on LinkedIn, Jim Blasingame. My pronouns are me, my, and um so you can contact me there. There's a new the you can go listen to all the things that Ed and I have done over the years. They're all right there, and they're just easy to use. You can use there's and we have a and I have a mobile app, so mobile site, so you can use that too.
And for all the years that we've known each other, we've never met in person. I know this past year, you and Devana were planning on coming to New England for foliage season. What's the trip this year, and when are you coming to New England so we can break bread together?
Still thinking about it. We're still working on this fall. Yeah, we're hoping to do that, and of course we will be up there. I love your part of the world. I've been to Boston, the whole region. I know it pretty well. I've been up there quite often, and I
All
love it
right,
up
well, we
there.
need to get you up here. We need to sit down and drink a beer together and have some fried clams or something. This has been such a pleasure, Jim. It means a lot to me for you to spend the time, for you to share these insights, and I thank you for doing that. So let's wrap up with a really easy question. Take 30 years of professional wisdom and our hour of conversation and figure out how to tie it up in 3 minutes for us. Put a bow on it, and give us final advice for companies today.
From a broad standpoint, I just can't stop coming back to this one immutable fact. You and I are analog human beings living in a digital age. It's not going to get it's not going to do anything but get faster. AI is going to complicate things. You've been given digital has been democratized. Quantum is not going to be democratized. AI is going to, I don't know what that's
Right.
going to do, but it's going to disrupt professions, 1,000-year-old professions, and government. It's going to disrupt governments, and 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 so we've got to deal with all that. But just remember, you and I are analog. With all this other stuff going around us, we're analog. Our employees are analog. Our customers are analog, and the things that we're going to respond to are high touch, uh, 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 accountability, and uh, things that make human beings want to be around each other, no matter how much digital you have. As Nesbitt said, no matter how much high tech we have, we're always going to want high touch. And if you'll just focus on that, I don't know how we're going to get out of this any other way if we can't revert back and hold digital accountable to the immutable fact that our great grandchildren, whatever world they inherit, they're going to have the same protoplasm
Right.
as you and me. Until a baby's born with an USB in their ear or a Bluetooth brain, they're going to be like us. And that's what we have to come back to. We have to find a way to do that.
That's
And
relevance.
yeah, and as far as the marketplace is concerned, it's very simple. Just love up your customers, and they won't run. You won't. They won't. They'll never leave you. Love them up.
Well, thank you, Jim. This has been such a joy, such a pleasure, so much great information. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Thank you, Ed. It's been a pleasure knowing you, and I'm looking forward to continuing that. And you got a great program here. I appreciate
Thank
the
you.
time. I've
And for
enjoyed it.
everyone listening, make sure you dig into Jim's content, grab a copy of the book, The Age of the Customer. It's 10 years old, but it's completely relevant today. So jump on Amazon and get your copy of it. And be sure, please, to hit the bell, like, share, subscribe to this podcast, send a link to this episode to somebody who you think will find value in it. Thanks very much for listening and for joining us today.